So not too long ago, I worked at a facility where about 40 boys stayed. And these were mostly boys who were from troubled backgrounds. Parents were dealing with drug abuse, things of that nature. And so I worked the night shift. So I was the one that says goodnight to all the boys, and I'm the first one that they see when they wake up. When you're dealing with 40 boys, you have to do things in routine. 9:30, lights are out. You have 30 minutes to go to each of the rooms, 2 boys per room, and say goodnight. So I had this routine. I go in, good night, Sam, good night, John, good night, down and down. You know, go out of the room, go into the next room. And I go into this one room, young man, James, was in the room, and he often would request prayer. You had a few boys that would request prayer. Now, obviously, we don't do proselytizing, so it's voluntary. And if a young man requests prayer, then, okay, we'll pray with you. So whoever your roommate is, by default, you're a part of the prayer. Because, you can't avoid that. So, it was like, Mr. Stephens, can you say a prayer? And I was like, I was running out of time because it's almost 10 o'clock. Everybody's got to be asleep. So I was like, okay, let me do a short version because, we can get involved in our prayers sometimes. And so we start calling all everybody's relatives out and all this other stuff. So I was like, let's just go ahead. So we started praying and then we ended it. And then I get to the doorway. And as I get to the doorway, I hear this like puberty-stricken voice that was like, Mr. Stephens. I was like, that's not James's voice. So I turn around, and it's Sean. He sits up in the bed. He said, Mr. Stephens, can I ask you a question? And I said, okay, Sean, it's almost time to go to bed. What is it? He says, how do you know God is real? And I was like, I have like 5 minutes. You're going to ask me, how do I know? So I pull up a chair and I sit down. I start talking to him. And I'm like, okay. I say a number of things. And he stops me, actually. He's like, well, I don't want to hear a whole lot of scriptures. And I hadn't given them any scriptures. I don't want to hear a whole lot of scriptures. I want to know, Mr. Stephens, why do you believe God is real? And I was stuck because I said, okay, it hit me. It's not my job to try to convince him to believe God is real. Maybe I just need to be a witness. So I start telling him some things, and then one thing he became very enamored with was the fact that I mentioned God partners with people to be conduits of his power. So he says, like superheroes? I was like, yeah, like something like that. And I knew, his parents had been dealing with drugs and all of that. And so I said, I recalled an occurrence in Cincinnati where we were in church and some men who had substance abuse problems stumbled into the church. And I happened to be preaching that night. This was in an area over the Rhine. Some of you may be familiar with it, drug infested. At the time, they hadn't started rebuilding, or some of us would say whitewashing the neighborhood. At any rate, when they stumbled in, it was right in the middle of the sermon, and one of the gentlemen was so intoxicated, he probably had been doing some other things. He was kind of shouting out, saying certain things, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Because I saw members from the church get up and go around this gentleman like they were going to take him out. And my mind went back to when I was an adolescent in D.C., Southeast D.C., which was a very crime-infested area at that time. And there was a female pastor that I went to church, at her church, and I remember a woman who struggled with substance abuse. One of the members brought her into the church during prayer on Wednesday night. And she started shouting out, she staggered in, she shouted out, and they sat her right in the pew in front of me. And the pastor called her down. Several people escorted her down, And she laid her hands on her and told everybody to start praying. And as they prayed, I remember the woman all of a sudden stopped talking, stopped shouting out. She stood up straight. Her eyes were bloodshot because I looked at her eyes. When she got back to the pew, eyes were clear. She was sober. And I remember being like, how did that happen? And in that moment, my mind had gone back to that moment, and I was preaching. Because I kind of stopped preaching. And it was amazing. It felt like it had been an hour, but it probably was maybe like 30 seconds. And I remembered that moment, and I said, either I'm going to believe, the power of God or not. And so I asked them to bring the man up, and I asked for members of the church who felt led to come. Some of the men that were there, they came up around him, and the whole church started praying. We prayed, and I didn't know. Part of me thought, what if we pray and nothing happens? What are people going to say? What am I going to think? And as we prayed, I don't know, I guess we got lost in the prayer. Next thing I know, this man straightens up. It was like the smell of alcohol began to lift off of him. And his eyes went from being bloodshot to being clear. And the man began to audibly talk soberly about a lot of the pain that he had been dealing with. And by the time the church finished praying, I didn't even finish preaching because the church we were praying, he was sober. And I told Sean that, and I said, Sean, ultimately, it's not tied to personality. Every person, anyone who believes, no matter where you are, what your background is, if you have the courage to ask God to use you as a conduit, I believe he'll do that. I said, so that's all you have to do. Well, time went on, days went on, long story shorter. I noticed that Sean's behavior had changed. He was different. And one day I asked him, he was helping people. He was not as caught up in the history of his parents. And I said, what's the change, He said, Mr. Stephens, I asked, and God answered. Thank you. That's it.